Welcome to Figure Out Your Life podcast, the podcast where we try to find the answers to life's everyday questions. I'm your host, Toya T, aka Toya T, PhD, aka your sister from another mister, aka the best friend that you need but didn't know that you wanted, aka I'm not your superwoman. I'm not that kind of girl that you can let down and think that everything is okay. Y'all, I am only human. Shout out to those who actually caught my cultural reference. Okay. Anyway, let's get into the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It is another day, another week, another month in the pandemic, in 2020, in Trump's America. But despite all those things, I am feeling good. Okay. Feeling very good, very grateful. For one, I don't know if I said it on the last podcast, but I want to tell you guys that I really like my new job. And that is one thing that 2020 brought for me, that after I stepped out on faith and decided that I could not stay where I was before, that in that journey that I was able to find this position that very much fits where I am right now in my life. So I'm happy that despite working remotely, that I'm actually forming relationships with my coworkers and with the students that I'll be working with. And another thing that I'm very happy about is you guys' response to my last podcast episode, the figuring out dating and sex with the flirty savage. I had a feeling in my gut that it was going to be a good episode. I enjoyed recording it. And the fact that it is the fastest downloaded episode of my podcast is just a sign that I need to continue to follow my gut. It's doing numbers in 1 week that episodes that have been published months ago have not even done yet. I am so very grateful to you guys, and I'm assuming there's probably some new listeners. So welcome. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you'll stay and join our tribe of people who are looking to figure out their life. And I don't want to go on too much longer because I think this episode is another good one that you guys will really enjoy. And I have a strong feeling that it's going to take off from this podcast, that it's going to turn into a much bigger project for me in the long run. And I think I would be very happy about that. But I don't want to go too much into that, but I wanted to put it out into the universe because that is the way to set your intentions and to manifest the things that you want to see in your life. So I'm putting that out there, that this episode is going to be a jumping off point for something much bigger. And before I get into the episode, I want to, of course, shout out some 5-star reviews. This one comes from Judav. This person says, love the podcast and her transparency on real issues we as Black women face. Thank you very much, Judav. This one comes from @RealMe. It says, her realness is off the charts. The topics are everyday life and entertaining also. Thank you. The next one comes from Total Cynic, which says, Dr. T's episode, it is an unabridged, direct, grown folks discussion of adulting for this generation. Wow. Thank you. That's exactly what I'm going for. And the last one, this one is from Moke H, and I know exactly who this is because it's his actual name. It says, Toya is wise and real. She has a unique perspective and some awesome insight. Listen to her and you definitely won't regret it. Thank you, Moke H. I appreciate ya. And that's it for my shout out of 5-star reviews. If you would like to get a shout out on the podcast, all you have to do is leave me a 5-star review wherever you are listening to this podcast. I would appreciate it. Anyway, let me stop rambling on. I want to introduce my guests on this week's episode. They are 2 friends of mine from college. If you don't know, I went to Columbia University in the city of New York, and I met these ladies while I was there, and we are still friends, and we've had conversations about this topic, and I'm very excited about having them on the podcast. And with that said, I'm going to start the show. All right. Unique perspective and some awesome insight. Listen to her and you definitely won't regret it. Well, thank you, Moke H. I appreciate ya. And that's it for my shout out of my 5-star reviews. If you would like to get a shout out on the podcast, all you have to do is leave me a 5-star review wherever you are listening to this podcast. I would appreciate it. And if you don't want to give me a 5-star review, that's okay too. But I'm just telling you, I work well with positive affirmations. I'm just telling you how I respond. And so this is a spotlight for the 5-star reviews. And so if you want to be a 5-star review shout out, you're going to have to give me one. And I promise you, I'm going to get through all of them. So far, I am just working on Apple Podcasts, and I will move on to the other platforms. So wherever you're listening to this, please, if you have not done so already, rate and review the podcast. And if you give me a 5-star review, and make me a 5-star review chick, I will shout you out on the podcast. So anyway, let me stop rambling on, and I'm going to introduce this week's episode, which is figuring out the negative effects of being a strong Black woman. So, well, I think I already talked about this. Gosh, my brain is going. Anyway, I want to introduce my guests will be on this week's episode. They are two friends of mine from college. If you don't know, I went to Columbia University in the city of New York, and I graduated from Columbia College in 2005. And I met these ladies while I was there, and we are still friends, and we've had conversations about this topic, and I'm just very excited about having them on the podcast because, as if you have noticed from my guest list, like almost everybody has been a friend of mine or someone I connect with. And that is because I feel like the kind of conversations that I have with folks, certain conversations really do need to be recorded and shared with others, because I feel like that people can get a lot of insight from them. And so this is exactly where I'm going with this episode. These two women that I invited on the episode are women I've had these kind of conversations with, and I'm just really excited for you guys to get an insight into our feelings about being Black women in America, and particularly about this idea of the strong Black woman and what its impacts can be, what kind of impact it can have on Black women's lives. So with that, I'm going to start the show. All right. Hey, everyone. I have two special guests on the line today, and we're going to have a informal conversation about the misconception of the strong Black woman, or the strong Black woman trope, and some of the pitfalls about it. And I will give them a chance to introduce themselves. So go ahead, ladies.
Courtney, I'll let you go first.
That's funny. Hey everyone, I am Courtenay Barton. It's funny to say, it sounds funny to me, but I'm a philanthropist for a living and also Pan-Africanist by outlook. And if anybody has been following me on social media, not that anybody listening would be, but people know that I have been talking nonstop about Black women recently. So I'm really excited to have this conversation right now.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I am Claire Gibson. I'm an intellectual property attorney. I'm based out of New York. I run my own firm, help a lot of businesses, a lot of them Black-owned businesses, with getting their branding done. For me, this topic has a lot of layers. I spend a lot of time in spaces for Black women attorneys because they are so few of us. Literally, the numbers, last I checked, were about 3% of attorneys in the US are Black women. And when you get into spaces like intellectual property, when you get into spaces like corporate legal, typically you will be the only one in the room. So my perspective on the misconceptions of strong Black women very much come from a professional standpoint, and what it's like to have to portray that image, because you really have no choice in those spaces. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this.
Great. Let's start off with just one question. I'm pretty sure it will spiral into different conversations. Claire and Courtney, what does strong Black woman mean to you? When you hear someone say, that's a strong Black woman, how would you define it? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I would say that I think on the generous end, a strong Black woman is somebody who keeps going despite all the things that the world likes to throw at Black women, which are generally pretty harmful and difficult. Our health, the fact that we're not being remunerated for our work as we should be, and all of these things. And typically it's, yeah, she's doing it, she's still here, she's standing, she looks good, all that other stuff. On the flip side, all of those things are still like coming at her. And so the strength is sometimes, this perceived strength, I should say, an excuse to not help her out, in my humble opinion, right? Like, she don't need no help, so we're not going to offer no help, or we're going to expect the Black woman to continue to do these things, uphold the community, uphold the family, uphold the household, fight the racists, all of these things, as a way of letting that happen without necessarily critiquing the circumstances under which Black women labor, emotionally and otherwise, and doing anything to materially change them.
For me, I immediately think about what you've described as the flip side. I don't automatically think about, okay, yeah, she's doing all of these things. Of course she is. She has no choice. I immediately think about the fact that for Black women, we have no choice. No one cares about our tears. No one cares about our pain. We're raised in a way where it's, you're crying, your parents or your family or whomever is looking at you, what are you crying for? And the fact of the matter is that there's no one there for most of us who's going to pick us up and dust us off and help us keep moving. It's just not going to happen. You don't have a choice but to pick yourself up and keep moving. And I was thinking about this again in the context of work environments. And I've worked in a lot of corporate places. I've worked at a couple of law firms, and the only people that I have ever seen crying in an office have been white women. And we could get into a whole tangent about the weaponization of white women's tears, but I'm using it as a juxtaposition because white women feel comfortable or will at least engage in that behavior in a corporate environment, in a professional environment, because it gets them results. It gets them a response. It gets them feedback. Black women, very rarely, me personally, I've never seen a Black woman crying in a professional environment. And I think that is very largely because we know no one cares. Not only is it not going to get a sympathetic or empathetic response, it is going to be attacked. And if anyone cares at all, it's because that's what they wanted us to be doing anyway. The goal was to cause harm. The goal was to cause injury. And I think that's just the perfect example of what it means when we're talking about strong Black women. We have no choice. No one cares about our pain.
I will say I cried twice at work in front of people in these last few months. All the result of everything that is happening outside this whole pandemic, which in of itself is trying. I think people have been underselling how emotionally trying it is, how difficult it is. Yeah, my skin flipped out. I've been dry and flaky and all of these things, but also in those early months, not knowing how long it was going to go on, being separated from my family, living in Ohio. My family in New York had it. My mom is of the age where she's at greatest risk. And I am having these staff meetings in Zoom, and people are like, what are you doing? What are you grateful for in this time? And people are like, oh, time with my family to bake and walk the dog and stuff like that. I'm like, there's a pandemic outside and I can't get to anybody that I love. And I cried. And I think that shifted the entire tone of the meeting, because I wasn't really trying to deal with this sort of check-in of like happy. I wasn't happy. I don't think anybody really expected that or really knew how to deal with that. I got a couple of messages thereafter, but it was so jarring, I could tell, for everybody in the meeting. And then the second time, after the murder of George Floyd and the protests that took place just 2 blocks from where I live, and if you walked 2 blocks in one direction, people are out there fighting for justice, and 2 blocks the other way, people are partying on their boats, literally. And then we got to go to work the next day and pretend like none of this is happening, like it's not still a pandemic. All of this is not happening outside, like we're not being dragged down. And where I live, downtown Cleveland, this curfew that was imposed, that was actually like, you really couldn't leave your house for 4 days straight because the National Guard is on patrol. And let's not act like Cleveland does not have a history of killing Black people in the streets. It was really trying. And we got to just continue on through this. Bear up. show up for the meeting and have a check-in. Do you really want to know what's on my mind? You don't really want to
No.
know what's
No,
on
they
my
don't.
mind.
No.
You
And
really don't.
what's interesting is that when I think of strong Black woman, I have two cultural references. One is that Karen White song, Superwoman.
Yes.
And it's funny because I've heard other people talking about the term Superwoman and Black women, and they're like thinking of the Alicia Keys song. And I'm like, that's not what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of Karen White talking about, I'm not your Superwoman. I'm not the type of girl that you can let down and thinking everything is okay. Boy, I am only human. And the fact that she had to say that last part about being human always stayed with me. And the second cultural reference is Maxine Waters, Representative Maxine Waters, particularly when she was really going through the fire with these, oh gosh, these people in Congress. And then she came out with that statement of, I'm a strong Black woman and I won't be intimidated, or I can't be intimidated. And I took that to heart in terms of not backing down when people want you to not speak up, to not be in those spaces, to not advocate for yourself. And so I saw that as a rallying cry. But I also recognize in both of these references that I used is that there is a lot of burden put on Black women to constantly be on top of everything. And you mentioned it before, Courtney, about being able to battle racism and take care of the home, take care of the children, work the job, take care of the household, like just be on top of everything. And that is very much tiring. And when I had this discussion with my mother about this, she pointed out to me that are people calling Black women strong because there is an assumption that Black women are weak? And I'm like, I don't think I've ever heard anyone, use that phrase, weak Black woman.
Yeah.
But then she pointed out to me that no one ever uses the term strong white woman. And
Absolutely not.
yeah, but we constantly talk about white women's tears. We talk about white women's tears. We talk about them as damsels in distress. So we already know what kind of images or what's expected of white women. But for some reason, when they use strong connected to Black women, it just comes with so much weight that is very much unfair. I feel calling us superwomen takes away our humanity because it denies the fact that we're actually human like every other person who feels pain, who feels frustrated, who feels a lot of different emotions that for some reason they don't allow us to actually have. We can't be angry because then we're the angry Black woman. We can be strong, but the strong comes with not necessarily what I consider virtues, but more like, ooh, she was able to endure, which I think has a lot of repercussions for other parts of our lives. For example, in terms of our health, where if some listeners aren't familiar with the history of gynecology in this country, I wrote down his name and I always forget it, but J. Marion Sims started in the 1840s doing medical experiments on enslaved Black women and didn't use any anesthesia because he believed that Black people, and particularly Black women, did not feel pain. Even when they
he's
cried
considered
out.
the father of gynecology, right? There's a statue of him in New York City.
Father of gynecology. We wouldn't have some of the things we have in terms of knowledge about gynecology without him. They have that statue, but when you find out how he got that statue, how he got that acclaim,
Let's reframe that as without those women.
Yeah.
To hell with him.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even their choice. Like they had no choice.
It wasn't their choice. And how can you say they don't feel pain when they're screaming out and then you're saying, nope, that doesn't count?
I think bringing up the history of this is exactly where we need to be looking. We talk about the emasculation of Black men. We don't talk about how Black women's femininity has been stolen throughout the history of this country. We talk about white women and how there's no context of, the strong white woman. We talk about the damsel in distress when we talk about white women. That's because white women in the culture of this country have always been seen as something to be protected. Something to be safeguarded. They are the mothers of their race. They are to be kept at home and taken care of and provided for. Even with the women's rights struggle for white women, when you look at what it was they were fighting for, and in comparison to what Black women have been fighting for, there are very clear differences there. When white women were fighting to work outside the household, Black women had been working alongside Black men in the fields for hundreds of years.
Yes.
There's just very stark differences. And that plays out in the conversations that we have when we're talking about Black women as compared to white women, and the conversations that we have when we're talking about within the Black community. Mm-hmm. Black women don't get to be feminine in the same way white women do. Mm-hmm. That's just point blank, period. It's not seen the same way. We're expected to be strong. I think it was like a month or two ago, there was this discussion passing around on social media, and it was from a men's group, and they had asked the question about what praise or something along those lines do you have for Black women? And comment after comment after comment was basically, and I'm paraphrasing, how strong Black women are and how much crap they can put up with.
Yes,
that's basically pretty much what it is.
It's so often.
Yeah, and that has been ingrained in this society for hundreds of years. It's not even a question. It's pretty much you as a Black woman are expected to put up with whatever is thrown at you and keep moving, because that's what we've had to do for hundreds of years.
And I wonder if that is tied to slavery.
Oh, it is. That's why we were brought here. That's literally what we were brought here to, both pick in the fields and cook the food, have the babies, forced or not, take care of them, do all of these things. That's what we were
take
here
care of the
for.
master's babies too.
All have the master's babies.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. And we have hardly been able to escape that conception. So even now, like, I was having a conversation with 3 Black women academics earlier this week, and one of them pointed out a statistic that I didn't know, but that there is a marked decrease in Black women's life expectancy, an inverse relationship to their education.
I believe
that makes perfect sense.
I believe that.
And I thought I knew some of these terrible statistics. I trot out statistics all the time. I love data, but this one floored me. So wait, so we get all these degrees and we're going to live, shorter lives because of it?
In fact, not only for Black women, the more educated you are, the shorter your lifespan, the less likely you are to be married. Like, there's the increases and supposed things that are supposed to get better when you have more education that applies to everybody else. Increased wealth and stability and all these other things do not apply to Black women. They don't.
Do not.
I've had this conversation in the context of marriage. For white people, marriage is a wealth building tool. It has always
supposed to be
a wealth-building
as it's supposed to be.
That does not translate for Black women. It just doesn't. So I'm not at all surprised. I didn't know that statistic, but I'm not surprised to hear that all these additional degrees is going to put me in the grave sooner. I'm not surprised. I'm talking about my stomach ulcer and my migraines and the allergy. That makes perfect sense.
And I don't know if it was in that class that we took in college, that the sociology of stratification, social stratification. That's what it was called. And
I didn't take that one.
Oh, yeah, we were in that together.
We were in that class together, and I always thought of it as depress me, period, because all that professor did was just like list out statistics about how I wasn't going to be married, I wasn't going to have great wealth, I was going to have all these
I think I remember the most jarring one for me at the time was when he talked about the fact that socioeconomic status is not inherited for Black people the way it is for white people. So if you as a Black child, if your father's a doctor, you very well have the same likelihood of ending up being a sanitation worker or any other kind of blue collar worker. It means your parents' accomplishments mean nothing. There's no generational wealth. There's no inheriting social status. You are starting from scratch every generation. And I remember that day and I was like, why the hell am I here?
I know. I felt that too. I was like, are you serious? Okay, keep writing down these facts for the exam, but goddamn.
Yeah.
Can you stop? Do you notice? Can you read the room? This is not helpful. And the thing about that is that I don't think it was in that class that was mentioned. It might have been in one of my graduate school classes where they pointed out that marriage, as you're talking about as a wealth builder for white women and other women that are not Black, that I think it was talking about the marriage rates among women. And they were pointing out that maybe Black women don't get married at the same rate because it's not financially beneficial to them. So if you're going to be making more than your husband, if you're going to be taking the majority of the financial burden, then you might as well be doing it by yourself. And when I saw that, I was like, that would make sense. If we're one of the most educated groups in this country, of course, we can put 2 and 2 together and realize if I can do this and this by myself and you come in and you bring in the negatives, like you take away from that, I don't need you. What do I need you for?
There
And that's
was
definitely what it is. Sorry,
recently,
Courtney.
oh no, on the socials, and I really don't even follow reality show stars too much, but there was a clip that I saw of Masika, who was on some, I don't know if it was a TV show podcast, and she's like, listen, I afford my own house all by myself. Like I do, like, what do I need a man for if he's not going to contribute to my life financially? And people were dragging her, and I'm sitting here in my apartment that I pay for all by myself. Girl, I hear you. Like,
That
what for?
circles back
What
to what
for?
we were saying about Black women, white women, and other demographics as well. Because of this concept of the strong Black woman, we're not allowed to say things like that. Meanwhile, when I sit around with my white girlfriends and my Asian girlfriends, that's the conversation. And they get to not only say it, they get to flat out expect of their men that you're going to do this, that, the third, and the fourth. I remember one of the most interesting conversations I had with a white girlfriend of mine was like, oh yeah, I make my, and I don't want to get into too much detail because I don't want the person to know who I'm talking about, but this was another attorney, very well educated. And she was like, yeah, I make my husband max out his contribution to my IRA. And I'm sitting there like, wait a minute. You are a double Ivy educated white shoe law firm corporate attorney. He does well, but he does not, his earning potential is not hers, but that is still expected of him. And it's not a debate. She's not called a gold digger. She's not criticized in any way. That is just the expectation. That is his role as a husband to help provide for his wife now and in the future, period. If she were Black, she would be dragged for filth for saying that.
Oh,
it's
somebody's always trying to drag a Black woman for something.
Yes,
always.
but when it comes to this expectation that when you have a husband, he's supposed to be a provider, Black women aren't allowed to say that. I sit around, white women get to say it, Asian women get to say it, Black women don't get to say that without being harshly criticized. And I think that the reason for that goes right back to what we've been discussing. This idea that Black women are supposed to be strong and independent and you're supposed to contribute equally the same way we were contributing equally in the fields. It's just a very different perception of what white women and other women are allowed to do and how they're viewed and how they're supposed to be taken care of. Nobody thinks Black women are supposed to be taken care of. So
That's
we're
true.
not allowed to ask for you to show up to the table with half or more.
Yeah, but it makes sense. You said we were expected to do as much work in the fields as Black men, but on top of that, we were also in chattel slavery seen as providing the labor and reproducing the actual labor. Yeah, you were supposed to be doing all of these things and more. And if your husband or whoever your partner is gets sold off, you're still expected to do the same thing.
And that attitude
yourself.
has not changed. It has not changed.
No, it hasn't. Even after they ended slavery in the United States, Black women were consistently employed because they stayed in the same jobs up until the 1960s. They were
up until today.
I'm sorry, yes, I would say today, because the housekeepers and the nannies, the au pairs, I'm sorry.
We saw it. We saw it on
right.
campus all the time. The Black nannies who were bringing their employers' children to play on campus.
Yeah, although I feel like the pool is being diversified in nannies and au pairs. Au pairs are usually considered European or thought of to be of European descent.
Most of my friends with au pairs now have European au pairs, but when you walk through Brooklyn Heights, you still see
it's still there.
Black nannies and pushing the little white babies and the Bugatti, whatever, strollers.
Yeah. I mean, but just looking, as you said, the statistics, like that has been consistent. They can always say where Black women have been working. They've been working in the households of white people, either as their maids, either as their nannies. And that was a consistent stream of income for them to be able to take care of their families. But in terms for Black men, they didn't have that same consistency. And so we developed as a community where the women always had the possibility to work because everyone was always looking for a housemaid or for someone to take care of their children. But for Black men, their job prospects were a little bit more unstable because outside of sharecropping and then finally getting into Pullman porters and I don't even know what else would be a typical Black male postal worker, there wasn't a consistent labor niche for them to fill. So it makes sense that Black women would be always seen as these strong figures in whatever terms people want to call it, because they always had to have taken care of the home because they were the ones that would consistently be bringing in the money, regardless of what their husband was doing. And even on that, they were still expected, because of patriarchy, to be I hate to use the word subordinate or
Submissive.
That's the word. Submissive to their husband.
Religion.
Even if he wasn't working.
Not, well, some people feel it.
And if you actually acted like the person who was the breadwinner, like you were, you would be seen as emasculating the black man. And that's something they're still putting out there. If you say too much, oh, you like to emasculate black men. Even with the discussion about Megan Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez, where this black woman allegedly was shot by this black man, and in her pain she still wanted to protect him when the police came, because she said, I know the optics, I know there's guns here, they might shoot me and him.
Can we
in the situation
as the artist that shoots black women? I don't want to name the man.
Yes, the artist that shoots black women. We'll just call him that.
I blocked him on
Daystar,
social media. I can't do it.
The deporter, the one that needs to be deported.
To the obscurity that I thought he was in, before I realized that apparently they're like inviting him to places and putting him on the news. No, the artist that shoots black women.
And he had the nerve to come out with an album talking about how she lied. It don't make sense. And I was looking in the comments, I think it was in the Shade Room or someplace, and some black women were like, yeah, I believe him.
Yeah,
I believe him, because the story wasn't consistent. When the girl said out her mouth, showed you her wounds. You saw the video of her coming out of that car limping, and she told you that I didn't say anything because in the climate that we're in right now, any one of us could have gotten shot. My security, my friends, me, him. I was trying to de-escalate the situation and help you out. And you're going to come back and talk dog shit about me? Say that I'm lying? And then have black men say, yeah, I agree with that. And some black women who go along with it. It just doesn't make any sense.
That poor woman, going to be black women that support patriarchy, that further misogynoir. That also never surprises me, because you were talking about the role of being submissive. It's not just patriarchy. It's also specifically, you can't talk about the black community without talking about Christianity.
Yes.
You can't talk about Christianity without getting into the gender roles that are advocated for in the black church. It doesn't matter. I am not religious. I grew up extremely religious. I am no longer religious. The last time I was in a church, I honestly think it was God talking to me like, why are you here? Better. Because the entire sermon, and they locked us in there, the entire sermon was about how the husband is the head of the household. And this pastor went on about, it doesn't matter if your wife has an MBA or law degree, you are the one that makes the final decision, and you can choose to listen to some of what she has to say and weigh her opinions on things, but it is the man's job. And then he got into conversations about women doing laundry and all of these other things, and I was sitting there next to my husband, and he was sitting there looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and we walked out and didn't say a word to anybody, and we got in the car, and it was like, we're never doing that again. But there's this thing where black women from birth are told this is the role that you're supposed to take on. It doesn't matter how educated you are. It doesn't matter how much money you're making. If you are a good Christian woman, you are to be submissive to your husband. And it's damaging. It's ridiculous. In my opinion, damaging. I don't want to criticize anybody's religion. If that is your religion, so be it. But let's use a little bit of logic, please.
I would say some people accept that as a requirement of religion, and some people see it for what it is, which is a ploy for domination. I also feel like there are some women who cling to that idea because they want the same protection that we have been talking about women wanting.
Yes.
And can't see any other way to get it, right? Like no other way to get it other than to just make themselves as malleable as possible to a man. And to do it vocally so that they can be chosen. Yes. Then somebody will take care of me.
Yes.
It's painful to see. Like, it's painful to see. And Megan, like, bless her, when she went on live talking about her parents are gone, her grandparents are gone, she has no family left. She's in her early 20s and people are dragging her for filth. Like, she ain't been shot. by somebody. I cried watching it because all I could think of was she's literally all alone in the world. The people who are around her, many of them she pays. She has to pay them for protection. She has to pay them for this. How can she know who's actually on her side and who's just looking for a come up? She gets shot. She gets dragged. I don't know if anybody saw her performance that was on Tidal. I watched it. It was her first performance back after having been shot, and she was visibly winded and in pain, right? Like she had to sit frequently to perform these songs, but she has to keep pushing because she got bills to pay. Yeah. And all I can think of is this is how damaging it is to be out there expected to do it all by yourself and be dragged through the mud for it while somebody who shot you is barely getting any sort of scrutiny, drops a whole album, and people are like, oh, she probably deserved it. And I think the same thing about Rihanna, Chris Brown. Somebody at New Year's Eve, I got into it with somebody who was like, she probably deserved it. Excuse you? Excuse you? Excuse you? She could have died. She could have died.
Oh my God.
And we saw the pictures.
Yeah.
It was horrifying.
We saw the pictures. It wasn't like a slap and she called the police. We saw the pictures.
I actually am taken back to a moment a couple of years ago. I was in this discussion with some folks that I went to law school with, and I remember it very clearly because it was one of the most jarring and disturbing conversations that I've had. And it was a combination of Black men and Black women. And it was triggered by this discussion about whether men should have the right to tell their girlfriends what to wear. And then it turned into this discussion about what the disagreements mean in a relationship. And I still remember this Black woman, and I hope people don't know who I'm talking about, but this Black woman, educated Black woman, multiple degree having Black woman, occupies corporate spaces. And she said, if your man doesn't cuss at you every once in a while, then that's not love. And I remember she was serious. She was serious. And I remember being shocked as hell. How did that become the concept of love? This is an educated, worldly Black woman who truly believes that if you are not verbally, and God knows what else, if she also believes in physical abuse, but she's admitted publicly, if you are not verbally abused in a relationship and she doesn't see it as abuse, then that's not love. How did we get to the point where verbally abusing a Black woman is a sign that you are putting forth energy to care about her? Because if he doesn't cuss at you, he doesn't care in the first place.
That's horrifying. That's math. Horrifying. I will say, from my standpoint personally, the number one reason why I have gotten rid of a man is because I ain't like the way he talked to me. That is literally the first reason, right? Because I think about my home. It should be a sanctuary and I should feel safe there. Yeah. And Black women aren't afforded a feeling of safety.
No.
Basically. And if we go to the mat for a feeling of safety, people look at us like we lost our minds.
And when we were talking about, I'm just going back to the religious part about people seeing submissiveness as a way to get chose to be in a marriage or relationship that they are told is, I guess, the pinnacle of their life. And the only thing I can think of is John Gray, Pastor John Gray, and his wife, who I don't follow them, but I have heard that his wife is educated, has multiple degrees. And
so
this man has
an adult Black man.
Yeah. And this man has cheated on her publicly several times.
Clowning her.
And even said that she is an oversized coat that he had to grow into. Which meant that
he wasn't trying to feel her. She wasn't feeling her.
Like she was there to cover him, but he didn't fully fit for her. But she was supposed to take it because that is a part of being in a good Christian relationship, of the wife being this person that supports her man through all of his insecurities. Because she said herself that she saw her husband as that 16-year-old chubby Black kid that girls wouldn't talk to. And now that he is successful, that he is now filling his oaths and navigating that attention that he didn't receive as a teenager. And so she has to give him some grace because she sees where he's at. But in none of that does she talk about how does that affect her as a person who is in that relationship with this person that she is describing as a 16-year-old in a grown man's body?
I didn't hear all of that. I saw where he was complaining to the side chick about how she don't cook, and meanwhile he's
In front
offering
of
to cook
her child.
for the
Yeah.
side chick. He's offering to
Complained
cook
in
for the
front of
side
her
chick.
child.
But let's talk about character, because he could have been that 16-year-old who nobody was feeling at the time when they were foolish teenagers, and he could appreciate her for seeing what his worth was and sticking with him when other people would not. And instead, he chooses to walk all over her publicly, humiliate her often, and then she
Stays.
And she gets a Lamborghini truck. Let's not
I'm
mention
sorry.
forget
No,
that she
stop
also got
it. That doesn't make up for the trash. I've been married for almost 10 years, and I hear a lot of conversation in the Black community that, frankly, when it comes to marriage, the conversation is generally negative. You tend to have people who either don't believe in marriage because they believe that all of the marriages that they see around them, that they have witnessed, whether in their personal lives or on, we're talking about these celebrity couples, are false, they're fake, and these marriages or situations where women are constantly abused. Then they talk about how grandma had to sit in church and watch the side kids on the other side of the pews. Then you have the people who do supposedly believe in marriage, and they're generally of the religious background, and if you submit and all of these other things and you have a Christ-based marriage, you'll succeed. I fall into neither of those categories. I fall into the category of don't get married until you are emotionally aware of yourself. You have engaged in emotional intelligence and the work that it takes to be married. And when I look at people like that man, that pastor man, and I hate naming these people because I think they aren't worth talking about. And some of these even personal relationships that I've witnessed that have devolved, their marriages either never made it or they're still married, but it's an unhealthy situation. What I see is basically Black people who have not had the time, energy, resources, knowledge, access, what have you, to do the personal labor that you need to do in order to be in a marriage in the first place. We talk about this idea of the strong Black woman. That in and of itself is the result of trauma.
Yes.
Whether you are the woman living it or you are a man who views women that way, that is the result of trauma. Until you heal that type of trauma, you can't have a healthy relationship. Until you heal whatever childhood traumas you have, you can't have a healthy relationship. Until you address your mental health, you cannot be in a healthy marriage. We're talking about a grown man who, because he wasn't picked when he was in high school, now he's flooded with the attention of women. He doesn't know how to control and behave himself. That's ridiculous. You need to go talk to a therapist. That's just it. It's not that there's this thing about marriage and marriage being unhealthy and that's the only types of marriages we see. What it is that we're seeing marriage as a result of unhealthy mental health situations in individuals and their relationships with each other, sometimes in their relationships with their parents. Until you address these things, nobody's going to be having a healthy marriage in the Black community, not in a widespread way anyway. That's the issue. He is an adult. It doesn't matter what happened to him when he was a chubby teenager. He should have addressed that and his insecurities before he brought that woman into his life to be his partner. And she also should know better because she should be looking at this and realizing he's not fit to be a husband.
I will just also point out that, as it has been described, that's what she understands the source of the issue to be, right? Like she understands it to be that he was 16 and never picked. Did he ever say that?
I don't think so.
Because like she making excuses. She is taking her
Remember,
time
he
to make
called her the coat.
excuses.
He called her the
Yeah,
oversized coat that he had to grow into.
That is, I'm just thinking about Cardi B and when she tried to leave Offset the first time
and people dragged her.
And then he shows up on her stage, interrupts her set and says something like, "I love you, bruh," or something like that.
I love you, bruh.
First of all,
bruh,
she is at work.
Yes.
I'm sitting at my office like, I really wish somebody would interrupt my meeting or whatever it is that I have to do to say, "I love you, bruh."
And it wasn't even just like her job or meeting. Like it's one thing if she was like in the studio or something, but I think she was the first female like rapping headliner of some festival. So it was like a momentous thing. And he comes and he ruins it with this thing. Like she looked at him like, are you serious?
Are you serious?
I'm
the
headliner.
Right
I'm
now?
the headliner. This is historic.
You don't take me seriously. You don't take me seriously.
At all.
If this is what you're doing.
Seriously, he had to make that moment about him, which is the behavior of a child. That is the behavior of someone who does not know how to be selfless. And someone who does not know how to be selfless should not be in a marriage. We constantly talk about strong Black women and Black women doing for everyone and being selfless and giving for everyone. We need to start having conversations about Black men needing to learn to be selfless. And that's why he is not a husband. That's not a husband.
And I never understand how there's these discussions when men fail at relationships, that most women will try to come back and say, at least he's a good father. He might not be, like, I think Cardi has said it. He's not a good husband, but he's a good father. And but how can he be a good father when he's not treating the mother of his children? And that is every single woman that has had a child with him.
Agreed.
With some form of respect enough to, I know for two of them were born at the same time, not have children with someone else while you're having a child with me. And in Cardi's case, not going out publicly cheating on me when you asked me to marry you.
Because what's the modeling? What are you modeling for your children if this is
exactly
how you behave?
What was modeled for them.
And that's not.
And they don't realize that it's unhealthy as hell.
There's got to be more to good fathering than paying some bills.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean when I say people need to really sit with themselves, and not just in the context of marriage. Sit with yourself, sit with a therapist, please, before you have kids, before you call yourself being married to someone, because where did you learn love? Where did you learn about relationships? Where did you learn about monogamy? What behavior was modeled for you? Because those behaviors are socially learned behaviors. And if you did not have access to proper models of monogamous relationships, proper models of parent-child relationships, it's not that you can't be successful at it, but you are starting behind the curve, and you need to acknowledge that and do the work that it takes to get where you want to be. And my husband and I have that conversation all the time, because I grew up in a household where everybody was married. My parents were married, my grandparents were married, my aunts and uncles were married. My parents got divorced after they were together 20 years. My husband grew up in a single parent household. We were intentional and conscious about the negative behaviors that we witnessed growing up, as much as we could be. You still have to figure out some of it along the way. The negative behaviors that we witnessed growing up, the things that weren't modeled for us, the things that were modeled for us poorly, and being conscious of that and having intelligent conversation about it is the only reason why we work as a couple. If you're not aware of the fact that you have these unhealthy behaviors that you grew up witnessing, and you're not actively trying to reparent, reteach, relearn, you're not going to be able to get where you want to go. You're not going to be able to have those healthy relationships. Looking at people like Offset, and it's not everyone, of course, but people like Offset, my first question is, do you actually know any husbands and family men who are loyal to their wives and their children? That would be my first question for him.
I'm pretty sure that answer is probably going to be no.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
Because
and then the Black women are just out there, right, trying to pick up the pieces.
Yeah, we as human beings, we learn from watching other human beings do things. And so if you don't have a model for you to follow or someone to teach, you learn it either by yourself or you learn from just watching what other people are doing. And so it's very hard to say that he would have had, or anyone that is in a relationship that thinks it's okay to step out on your wife after you've made that commitment to her. It's obvious that you didn't have those strong models to follow in the first place. And if you did, it'd be a question of what happened. Where did you unlearn this? And for the women in these situations, they're also learning that a strong wife, a strong woman endures. Because strength, when you're thinking about the word strong and strength, it's about endurance. How much can you endure? Which is my problem with the word, because then we're not allowed to have any other reaction or emotion. We're not allowed to not endure and say, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to deal with you. And I think that's a lot of why people like Cardi who decide, you know what, I'm not going to do this with anymore. There's backlash because they see it as not being able to endure, as opposed to her preserving herself and her own health and her happiness and her child's, protecting her from that and actually saying this is an actual act of like preservation. But no, she's weak. She's a gold digger. She's this and she's that, even though she makes more money than him.
And I think we need to talk about the juxtaposition. If Black women are supposed to endure, what does that mean Black men are supposed to be doing? That means Black men are supposed to be apparently engaging in behaviors that put us in a position that have to endure. And you hear this sometimes, oh, all men cheat. No, because when you further that idea, it gives them an excuse to engage in behavior. That's simply not true. It's not true at all. And I think that it's problematic when we talk about Black women having to endure, because then we're setting a lower standard of acceptable behavior for everyone around this woman, this Black woman. Everybody else gets to engage and drop the ball, engage in bad behavior, and she's supposed to pick up the pieces. That makes absolutely no sense.
And the world reviles it when a Black woman says she deserves better. Signals that she believes and understands that she deserves. They hate it.
Yeah, no, we don't deserve. We don't deserve. We don't deserve unless we endure, unless we take all of this shit, all of the burden. We are the mules of the world, as Zora Neale Hurston said. We are supposed to be this beast of burden that just takes and takes and takes until we die. And the reward, maybe someone will feed us or pat us on our head or give us a Lamborghini truck.
I would have taken that truck and shoved it anyway.
I'd take the truck and leave.
I would take the truck as long as it's in my name.
Insist that it's in your name. Always insist that it's in your name.
Because that's our reward for being strong. I feel like there is never a good reward. It's something that doesn't make any sense. Oh, she stayed, so she got that shiny ring, or she got the Lamborghini truck. Or
I don't think most Black women who are staying and putting up a crap are getting even shiny baubles of anything.
Regular.
Realistic. Yeah, the regular sisters, the real women, are not getting cars, and they're not getting anything but single parenthood and STDs and stress. And no.
Although if you're single and you take that, like you're in a relationship with somebody and he does all that stuff to you, usually the reward is a proposal of marriage. And there are several examples of people, and I will use a celebrity so that everyone can easily understand the story. Two good examples are Gabrielle Union and Eudoxie Bridges, who's Ludacris's wife. Both of them around the same time were in relationships with these celebrity men, famous men, rich men. In the case of Gabrielle, she had her own money, but that's something else. And both of them had these men publicly cheat on them, and the evidence being a child being produced during a quote unquote break, but we know that the
break came after the baby.
The break came after they told them that the baby was coming. And for both of them, the result of them staying with them was that within a few months after the news hit about the child, they got engaged or married. In Ludacris's case, there was a secret marriage and they got married, I think, on Christmas Day or something like that. It was just like, oh, we're just going to get married in our house. No big wedding, but we all heard about the baby that was just born. In Gabrielle's case, she got the big wedding, but there was still a baby out there. And all that time, he hadn't proposed, he hadn't put a ring on it. But then when she decided to quote unquote stay and be strong, she got a ring.
I'll just say Cardi and Offset also got married in their house surprise after fights about infidelity and all that other stuff. That's exactly how that happened.
Yes. And so it's mind-boggling. That is what becomes the prize if you endure. And then people want to turn around and call these hashtag relationship goals.
Those people.
Lots of people. Lots of people.
First of all, are Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade actually legally married? I heard they were not.
I heard that they hadn't turned in the marriage license after the wedding, but I think they eventually did.
That's what I thought.
Interesting. I think people's in the Black community, people's concepts of relationship goals needs to change. As you didn't mention them, but I'm also thinking about Jay-Z and Beyonce's situation. Yeah. Even though they were married before the cheating, and I don't criticize any woman who chooses to stay in a marriage. That is a personal choice. I think, again, you need to do your self-reflection on what you expect of your life and what you're going to accept. So be it. But I do think that in the Black community, we need to change our idea of what relationship goals should look like. Relationship goals should not be Black women enduring the worst of behaviors and disrespect. That is just ridiculous. And what we do then is model for our children, that is what is acceptable. We mentioned even Rihanna and Chris Brown earlier. When Chris Brown beat up Rihanna, I wasn't surprised. And the reason why I wasn't surprised is because years before that, on Good Morning America, he talked about watching his mother get beat up.
Yeah, he did.
He talked about wetting himself and out of fear. And I remember seeing it and thinking, did this man ever get, he was a child, I think he was like 16 or 17. Did this child ever get therapy for trauma that he experienced? Because if he didn't, statistically speaking, if you just look at the hard numbers, he is very likely to repeat that behavior. Yeah. So when it came out, I was like, there, 1 on 1 is 2. I'm not saying that to make an excuse. The fact of the matter, again, these behaviors are socially learned behaviors. And unless you actively, intentionally choose to reparent yourself, relearn, and remove harmful things that you have witnessed and really affect your perspective on life, you're going to end up in the same patterns of behavior. That's just the way the human brain works.
I don't know if either one of you, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just saying, when these people are engaging in this behavior, Gabrielle, they have kids. Beyonce, they have kids. Ludacris, I don't know if they have other kids.
Yes,
and I don't
they
even
do.
know who the other couples are. Your kids, you're then putting your children to be in situations where they will very likely repeat that same behavior.
I was going to say, I don't know if either one of you at all observe or float around in any spaces where people talk about African traditional religions, their interest in them, trying to learn about them. But I will say, observing in some of these spaces, the number one question that somebody who is new to the space asks is, what's a spell that I can cast so that he will stay? And people who are in, like, who have been in it have been, don't do this. This is not the way you want to, do not do this. Are you in therapy? I don't think people expect people to ask that question. Are you talking to a therapist? Are you doing this? Are you doing this other work? Because let's say, maybe in 1830, your ancestor needed something to keep a man who might take care of her around. But in this year, we're asking for better things. We are asking for better things for ourselves.
Doesn't want you? That's the question. Why would you want somebody who does not want you?
Because I think in a lot of ways, there is dependence, there is learned dependence, there is this sort of modeling that you need somebody to stand in between you and X, Y, and Z. And even if they're not taking care of you or treating you right or all of those things, you need that. You need it. And I don't want to say, like, you, on the flip side of that, of course, is you're strong and independent, you don't need it. But at the same time, there isn't enough, I think, enough spaces that encourage Black women of any standing to know their worth and demand to be treated accordingly.
You hit it on the head there with the, no matter like what their social status is, their education level, like it's the same message, which makes no sense.
I think that narrative very much needs to change. I think that we are social creatures. Humans are social creatures. We talked about learned social behaviors, but we are communal creatures. We talked about when you're in this pandemic and quarantining alone, it's difficult. That said, as much as I believe in marriage, as much as I believe in partnership, I don't believe in abusive relationships. I don't believe in physically abusive relationships. I don't believe in verbally abusive relationships. I don't believe in emotionally abusive relationships. We talked about your home being a sanctuary. Your relationship should be a sanctuary. You should not need to be able to, you should not have to go to outside places to vent about your relationship. Your relationship should be the place where you get to vent about the rest of the world. And if you're not having that, something's not right. And whether you want to stay in it and work on it, and the two people working on it, fine. But don't think that you casting a spell or trying to minimize or diminish yourself to have someone stay with you. That is never going to result in happiness. And that narrative we need to change that. It's just not, it's not in anyone's best interest. It's not in the best interest of the women. I don't think it's in the best interest of the men. It's certainly not in the best interest of the next generation of Black children that we're raising. So,
But how do we change it? That's what I'm grappling with. Like, I know some of my interest in this topic came from Taraji P. Henson coming out and saying that, don't call me a strong Black woman because it's detrimental to my mental health because you're not allowing me to actually
Be
go
vulnerable.
all of the real emotions and experiences that I have. You don't allow me to be weak, to cry, to be frustrated, to be afraid, because of this constant expectation of showing up strong. And so I wonder, how can we change that in a world that constantly puts out this message that girls and women need to be quote unquote strong? Because that's the new campaign. That's the new, like, buzz that is going around, like, girls are brave, girls are strong, but the messages are so mixed up. It's, what do you mean by that? All of the examples you're giving me look like a girl being a regular child, being able to run and to exercise and to do well in math and science. And it's okay, I get that, but those are all the things that you denied women access to. But what does that have to do with being strong?
I think that's when you're having white women's feminism and their fight for what they're looking for conflict with Black women's experiences. The way we raise Black girls is not the way white girls are raised. It's just not. There's a difference. But with regard to how we change that, I think this is all a product of slavery. I do. And I tell people constantly, as much as we've accomplished in terms of equality and trying to better the Black community, you can't fix in 100 years what it took 400 years to destroy. So I think this is going to be a long ongoing process. And I think that the narrative around Black women, the narrative around Black men, what our relationships look like, how we raise our children, I think there's going to be an ongoing evolution. In terms of where we are now, I am a big advocate of therapy. Get you a therapist, get you two. Work on yourself, because, and this applies to Black men as well. There's a lot of stigma around Black men and therapy. There's a lot of stigma in the Black community about therapy, period. Our parents' generation, you don't need to do that. I think things have started to, that negative perception has started to erode in our generation, but it's still not where it needs to be. But Black men need to go take their behinds to therapy. If you are engaging in sexually reckless behavior, if you have several children by several different women, if you don't have a whole balanced view of Black women, you need to go sit with a professional and figure out why. Because you will never be the type of man that a woman deserves until you sit and start answering those types of questions. So that's my first bit of advice when it comes to people and how do we start to undo these things. Go sit with a therapist and start examining your perceptions of yourself, your perceptions of Black relationships, your perceptions of parenting. And once we start analyzing those things and changing those behaviors and relearning, unlearning unhealthy behaviors, I think that'll get us a lot further down the road. And also just simply having conversations like this, it needs to be talked about. These things have to be discussed. The fact that until you acknowledge there's an issue, you can't actually do anything or think of anything to remedy it. But I tell Black people, go to therapy. I tell my Black male friends, go to therapy. I tell people, if you are thinking about marriage, go to couples therapy. Because I have never met anyone who is so well adjusted that all of their relationships are going to be healthy. It just doesn't work that way. And even if you are that rare person who is so well adjusted, chances are the person you're in a relationship with, they're going to need some therapy. So just go ahead and take advantage. Take advantage of these wonderful professionals.
I agree. And make it free, like Taraji
therapy.
said. Make it free. Make it affordable. Make it so that people actually are able to access these resources, these wonderful mental health professionals. Because
there's some that have sliding fee scales, especially if not so much, I think in the rural areas, but if you're in an urban environment, you're in one of the major metropolitan areas, you should be able to find a therapist who has sliding fee scales. And go to therapy. And if people, and it's so funny, we're talking about health. The same way you get your physical every year and you get your physical checkups, you need mental health checkups. Yeah. There's this idea, I watched a TED Talk about this a little while ago, and he was talking about emotional first aid. If you have a scrape on your knee, you're going to go get your first aid kit. You're going to clean the area. If necessary, put on some ointment or a Band-Aid or whatever. because you have now experienced, your skin has experienced a physical trauma. It's no different when you experience emotional trauma. Those things leave scars.
Yeah.
If they're not properly taken care of, they fester. You have to acknowledge the psychological side of your health and the fact that it has as much impact as your physical health.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the beginning of us moving towards reversing some of these unhealthy ideas that we have when it comes to the strong Black woman and the relationship issues. Like therapy, people, go to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'd be helpful for a whole bunch of different areas of your life. The thing I'm thinking about is the statistic you said about, I think, Courtney, you said it, about the more educated Black women become, the more likely that they'll die earlier, like their life expectancy is being negatively affected by it. And all I can think about is my recent visit to the doctor last month. And pretty much the main issue she was saying is that your blood pressure is up now. Like usually my blood pressure is not an issue. And she mentioned, I think it might be like weight gain. And she's asking me like, oh, do you exercise? I'm like, lady, I exercise every day. Like at least take a walk because I got to get out my house because I live at home with my mama. And I like walking. So I don't think it's that. So it has to be something. It's stress.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was waiting for her to say, because even the nurse took it twice and she was like, oh, it went down. And I don't have, like some people have like medical office or doctor anxiety. So their blood pressure always goes up no matter what. I don't have that issue. I don't have that at all. And she's like, you need to work on that before I have to put you on medication. And my mother has high blood pressure. It's in her family. So that's a medical thing. But on my dad's side, it's not. So I've taken a lot of my medical stuff from my dad's side. Like I don't have all of these issues that appears on my mother's side of the family, but she has a blood pressure machine at home, like a portable one. So she took my blood pressure last week and it was super freaking high. And that was after a long, like tough week just in the world and at school, dealing with these kids and trying to make sure that they stay invested in their education, despite the fact that we are in a pandemic and teaching and learning remotely, and there's issues, and they have all these things that if you care about kids and you care about teaching like I do, you take it on. It becomes your burdens because you don't want them to go through it. And my mom is telling me like, oh, you need to do this and that. And I was like, I don't think that's what it is. And then she figured out it can't be a weight gain because I have been gaining weight and have blood pressure issues. And all I was thinking about is that being a Black woman in this world is what is causing me so much stress.
Yes.
Paying attention to the news, hearing about Breonna Taylor. I also cried recently, but I cried, what was it, Thursday? I cried twice in that morning. And I realized that's the issue. Like, it is hearing this news. I'm crying over somebody that I do not know. I do not know this young woman. I have never met her. And obviously I will never, ever meet her. But just thinking about
she's all of us.
Yeah, she's all of us. And having no justice, having them to say there's a wrongful death suit, but no one is wrong. We're charging the officer not for shooting at her or shooting her, but shooting the drywall into the next apartment and causing possible harm to the neighbors by doing that. And then to hear at the end of the day, like her life does not matter. And then people constantly, and my mom is one of those people who believe that Breonna Taylor is not in the same boat with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and all these other Black people that have been killed either by police or by white people, because she said they were doing their job. And I was like, okay, so you're telling me
they always are doing their job. That's
of course they're doing
okay. You know what?
Yes, they're doing their job. And I'm like, my blood pressure is going up. I was like, lady, so you're telling me if this was me, you would just be like, oh, they were doing their job? And she's like,
it's the wrong house. What part of the job is that?
But the thing is that she's not the only one. That I read an article that said that Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal said the same thing on TV. And
they didn't go to the wrong house. Her house was on the target list.
Was on the target list, yeah. So
a piss poor investigation. Excuse my language. I know your mama don't like cussing on the podcast, but I'm sorry. It was a piss poor investigation. They used very weak evidence to associate her with her ex-boyfriend with her because she had twice in the last 4 years bailed him out. They were some phone calls from the jail, and he had for a short period of time received mail at her house, which had ended months before that. So she was on the target list. It wasn't the wrong house, but the evidence that they used to justify the warrant at her home was weak as all hell. And in addition to that, he was already in jail. The reason why they continued at her home is because they were then looking for physical evidence to support his conviction. That's why they continued with that.
And what hurt even more is that after the fact that they try to justify her death.
It's not lost on me that it's a Black
by
woman.
going back to that ex-boyfriend and saying, can you please tell us that she was involved in your drug trade?
Yeah.
So that we can go out to the public and say, she was a part of the drug trade. She's a drug dealer. She's a drug dealing accomplice. So we were fully justified. And that's the consequence of engaging in that kind of behavior. And it hurt. It hurts so much.
Yeah. It's not lost on me that it's a Black woman that they find these excuses for. It is not lost on me.
Well, that's what they do. When you look at the number of Black women in prison and the reason why they're in prison, the charges and the associated charges, it's normally they seek out a Black man and then tie up a Black woman in his life in those charges. And that's the standard operating procedure. That's just how that works.
But I feel like with regard to the excuse making of they were just doing their job.
This is all nonsense.
They were just doing their job. This is what they said about Corinne Gaines. Well, she shouldn't have this, she shouldn't have that. Like you out here saying that you about this life of revolution. There's a Black woman who actually is also about this life of revolution. Well, she deserved to be shot. They always find a way, whatever.
Yeah. And then we're at the forefront of this. So I was watching Tamika Mallory speak at the press conference, like right after they had said what happened with the non-indictment, and her calling out. Cameron. Yeah, she called him out. She called out the Attorney General of Kentucky. She, called out the white militia and the police for how the police have been going around and targeting the peaceful protesters, but then the white militia, they just let them go against curfew and they don't arrest them for walking around with assault rifles. And she spoke about, we're going to continue this fight until we have no breath left. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, we are literally fighting for our lives and for other people's lives. And no one is fighting for us except for us. But yet we are killing ourselves by being at the forefront of these things. And this is my last point on this. Even for my job, where they have opened up these spaces where they actually do care about how are you dealing. But we have quite a few Black women in key positions, including the head of the region for the charter school in Massachusetts, where I work, is a Black woman now. Apparently was a white man before. She took over and she has completely change the way that she deals with the staff, the students, the communities that we're in, because we're serving Black and brown communities in the Boston area. And all of these affinity spaces that they had for us to just come and talk were run by Black women. And it's not lost on me that it's run by Black women. And when you go into these spaces, it's Black women that are talking about, I am scared. I'm thinking about getting a gun. I live in a house by myself that I own by myself because this is what everyone told me to do. And I was scared because I don't know what's going to happen. And people coming on there and crying and breaking up in tears about stuff. And it's all I'm seeing is Black women just taking on the entire burden of this. And it's just so tiring. So I was like, no wonder my blood pressure is high. It's nothing else. I can walk all day if I want to. But it's not going to help if I know that my life, according to the United States and the American justice system, does not matter. And it's hard to grapple with.
I want to acknowledge that Breonna Taylor's ex-boyfriend, I was very grateful that he did not take the plea bargain that they offered him to throw her under the bus to reduce his sentence. When we talk about standing up for Black women, granted, he made plenty of mistakes, but when we talk about standing up for Black women, I was very grateful that he did not put himself before her legacy. And I also want to acknowledge her current then boyfriend at the time of her death, who did what he was supposed to do.
Protect his woman.
Exactly. They live in a state where I believe there's castle law there. His gun was licensed. He had every right to shoot at intruders coming into his home. That is what he was supposed to do. So when it comes to what we expect Black men to do, look out for Black women. That's what that looks like. Obviously, they made mistakes as well, but that's what that's supposed to look. But with regard to the health effects of what it means to be a Black woman in this country, and even just, we could get into the whole systematic racism in the healthcare system. But before you even get to the doctor, just living and breathing and trying to exist and trying to thrive in this country is completely exhausting.
Yeah.
I relate to everything you're saying. At 2025, my doctor sent me to a cardiologist because I had constant tachycardia. My heart rate was always through the roof. And it wasn't because of any pre-existing condition. It wasn't because of an unhealthy lifestyle in terms of my activity levels. It was literally because I was working a corporate job. I had just moved across the country. I was newly married. I had 50 million things going on. And the cardiologist looked at me and was like, you need to change your lifestyle. you need to change your lifestyle. And that wasn't the first time I'd heard that. I've been a migraine sufferer since I was in high school. I had a neurologist tell me the same thing. You are too stressed. And so when we sit here and say that Black women with more degrees and more businesses and all of these other things end up in their graves sooner, I'm like, yeah, that sounds pretty familiar to me. It's exhausting. It's very exhausting. I was not surprised by what happened with regard to the no indictment with Breonna Taylor. But at the same time, I wasn't surprised because I don't expect justice for Black women in America.
And that's the sad part.
That reality and living in a world where you have to acknowledge the fact that your life simply isn't worth as much, that is a level of depression. It's a level of depression. It's a level of stress. It's a level of exhaustion. And that same night, I had to put on my smiley face and go to my organization's board meeting and smile and look at all of these other white women who that just was not on their mind that day. And that in of itself is exhausting. So when we talk about strong Black women, is it that we're strong in terms of stronger than everyone else, or is it that our survival just looks like a constant barrage and a constant attack from every direction, and you have no choice but to just keep trying?
I think it's
both. I don't think it's accurate to say that Black women are inherently stronger than everyone else. No. Because I think that takes, just like Taraji P. Henson said, it takes away the space for us to be vulnerable. Yeah. And it takes away this idea that we're not human. So I don't think that's fair. But I think what it is that we literally have no choice. We have no choice. And unfortunately, because we have no choice, statistically speaking, we die younger. Yeah. We die younger. Things don't work out for us the way they're supposed to. You talk about marriage rates. You talk about wealth generation. The world for us is upside down.
Yeah. Courtney, do you want the last word before we end this?
Okay. While I was sitting here listening, thinking, I thought about the Combahee River Collective and their statement, their manifesto, which I used in some of the work that I was doing this summer, which was a response to the pandemic and the protests and everything that's going on. And I quoted the Combahee River Collective to my board as I was proposing something, but another few lines from their manifesto really stood out to me and seems like it's apt here. I'll just read it. We reject pedestals, queenhood, and walking 10 paces behind. To be recognized as human, levelly human is enough.
Yeah. It'd be nice to get it. Thank you, ladies, for this conversation. Please, if you want people to reach out to you, support your businesses, whatever you're working on, go ahead and plug your information, your socials. So go ahead.
Like I said in the beginning, I am an intellectual property attorney, mostly brand law. I also do a bit of copyright. So if you are a business owner and you are looking to have your business names, your logos, your brands protected, you can find me at www.gibsonlaw.nyc. Or we're also on social media, and there's lots of free. I make it a point to put a lot of free, useful information on Instagram because I know a lot of startup businesses, small business owners really can't necessarily afford an attorney. So there's a lot of free information on the firm's IG if you're looking for ways to get started with your brand protection. And the handle is Gibson Law NYC.
So by trade, I'm a philanthropist. I do grant making in the field of arts and culture, but on social media, I'm talking about race and culture and history quite frequently. So You can find me on Instagram, High Heels in Books, N as in the letter N, not and, High Heels and Books on IG.
All right. Again, thank you, ladies, so much. This was long overdue, but I'm happy. I think it happened exactly when it needed to happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now let's move on to figure this out. Now, I don't have a long one. It's actually really quite short. And so I'm just going to say this. And if you can figure it out for me, I'd really, really, really appreciate it. So here it goes. Here's the burning question on my soul. Figure out for me why Donald Trump is still president of the United States of America. I swear to God, he's like a cockroach that will not die. Actually, he's the fly. He is the devil fly that was stuck to Mike Pence's head for over 2 minutes during the recent vice presidential debate. That is what he is. He is a fly that gets stuck to shit and will never go away. I don't understand what we have to do to get him out. He's been impeached, but he's still there. He got COVID, but he's still there. Like, I just don't get it. He has led to the death of over 200,000 Americans in 1 year because of his inaction, and he's still there. And I know some of you are going to say, well, the election's almost here. We can vote him out. Okay, but that is not quick enough for me. Okay, it is not coming quick enough for me because the things that have come out of his mouth that I know will affect my life, it just makes me so angry that he's still president, that he still has the ability to impact the lives of so many American people and people worldwide, since America is a top world leader. I just don't understand what we have to do. Why can't we? What can be done? See, I can't even get the words. I want someone to figure out for me, how can we get him out of the White House right now? Like right now as I'm speaking, right now, like this instantaneous moment. How can we do it? If you can figure that out, let me know. And with that, I'm done. If you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast so that you will get notified every time an episode comes out. Also, if you have not done so already, please go ahead and rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening to this. As I mentioned earlier in the show, if you give me a 5-star review, I will eventually shout you out on the show. So I'm just giving you a little bit of incentive. So you can leave your girl a 5-star review. And also, please share this podcast with at least 3 of your friends. Why 3? Because 3 is my favorite number. It is a magic number. It's the Holy Trinity. And I just really appreciate it. So I just want to end with this, folks. I hope you have a blessed morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. I hope you stay blessed. I hope that you continue to wash your hands. I hope that you continue to stay safe. And I hope that you go out and vote early, vote by mail, vote in person on November 3rd. But we need to get this mofo out of here. And with that, I will talk to you guys next week. Okay. All right. Bye.